Hi everyone, and thank you for joining another chapter of the Rainmakers, Striking Success to the Cloud. Today with me is my very honorable guest, Mr. Brad Casemore, who is the VP of Data Centers and Multi-Cloud Research in IDC. Hi Brad, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks very much, Steve. It's great to be here today.
Thank you. And today we would like to discuss your latest interesting research that was dealing with how to accelerate development to cloud native, mainly in the communication service provider sector. So could you describe a little bit first methodology behind the research and then maybe some key points?
Yes, absolutely, Steve. We conducted a survey recently, and it involved a wide range of communication service providers, telecom operators, as well as a smaller number of financial services companies. But it was primarily, the vast majority of respondents were communication service providers. And our goal with this survey was to ask them questions that related to why they were adopting cloud-native development platforms and architectures, and also what challenges they were experiencing as they adopted those platforms. You know, what sort of problems were they dealing with? How were they? And then we also wanted to know how they were overcoming those challenges, or how they had planned to overcome those challenges, depending on how far along they were. And we also asked them about, some of the barriers they had internally, some of the things that they felt they needed to do better. We asked them about their current platforms and tools, and how they wanted to, and what they wanted to see improved in those, or what they wanted to see in new tools. And it was a very revealing study, because it told us that everybody has challenges, but depending on where you are in the journey, where the respondents were in the journey, they met different challenges at each stage of their progress. So that was interesting
too. Indeed, that's fascinating. So what are the differences between the maturity steps in adoption?
Yeah, one thing that we found that was really interesting was that those who were really at the start of the journey had different challenges. And what happened with the ones who were, basically we segmented respondents into three groups. Those who were nascent, who were just starting out, only less than 25% of the way along their cloud native journey. And then we had what we call the more progressive or progressing group, which was about, up to 50% of the way, from 25 to 50% of the way along the path. And then we had the ones who were advanced. More than 50% of their applications had already been migrated to cloud native architectures. And what we found was the ones who were just starting out were dealing primarily with conservative IT strategies in their organization. That was their main barrier. And, they also had secondarily security and compliance concerns. But that was the primary problem for the progressing ones, the ones in the middle. Now, the advanced ones, very interesting, this finding was that they had all sorts of problems. They had all of the problems and all of the challenges. And for them, the one that was slightly on top was dealing with learning curves, right? Dealing with, it's taking too long to ascend those learning curves. They also had skill shortages. They had a conservative IT strategy, and they had security and compliance concerns. And I think what we drew from that was that the further along you get in your cloud native journey, the more you realize the things you didn't know at the start. And you find that you actually have multiple challenges and not just one. It's interesting. I mean, eventually you have all of these challenges. So.
Yeah, and actually I assume that the more mature ones are also tackling more the at-scale challenge. When you are at the beginning, usually you take, low-hanging fruit, small project, and it's more contained. You have a couple of people that understand, etc. When you're more mature, from our experience at least, you need a much larger pool of resources, and then you are challenged with a learning curve, with a skill scarcity, and all of those goodies in the market. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a great point, and it's interesting. You're seeing a similar thing in your customer base. And you mentioned the at scale, right? And it was very interesting. One part of the survey, we asked respondents to comment on, well, when you move to cloud native at scale, which parts of your organization are resisting this? And it's interesting. Obviously, as you'd expect, traditional developers were a barrier, and that's totally understandable because cloud native is new to them. They're struggling to learn it. They're struggling to ascend that learning curve. They may not have the right tooling, etc. And then IT operations were a barrier, right? Traditional IT ops in these service providers, and to a lesser extent, the executive team. But it was pretty much, I imagine you're seeing the same thing, right? Traditional developers really struggled to get their head and their arms around cloud native.
Yeah, correct. And actually, we saw that both internally within Amdocs as well with our customers. This is why one of our key decisions from the get-go several years ago was to develop what is right now known as the Amdocs Microservices Foundation, mainly to accelerate the learning curve and increase the pace of traditional developers migration to cloud native development. What do you see is right now the market key needs in addressing those challenges? How do they approach to address those challenges?
Yeah, one thing that came through loud and clear, and we asked as part of the survey, we asked the respondents about the weaknesses or deficiencies in their organization's cloud native development platforms and tools that they're using today. And they could provide multiple responses to this question. But one thing that came through loud and clear, irrespective of whether, certainly for the nascent, the ones who are early on the journey, they called out restrictive licensing. In other words, they probably had tool sets that were restrictive in terms of how they scale, how, the kind of flexibility of licensing, the elastic scalability that's required for licensing in a cloud environment. Because as you know, these cloud native environments are extremely changeable and dynamic, right? And probably the licensing wasn't good. The ones who were progressing were concerned about hidden cost. So they found that the platforms they were using often came with hidden costs. As they used them, they said, wait a minute, I didn't know I would have to pay an additional amount of money to basically unlock that feature set. And they complained about that. And the advanced ones, again, had all sorts of problems. They found that the tools they were using did not help them get over the learning curve, did not help them with the skills limitations within their organizations, right? As we talked about earlier, there are a lot of developers within these organizations who need the tooling to help them get past some of the cloud native hurdles. And they also complained about restrictive licensing and to a lesser extent hidden costs. So there were all sorts of issues. Those were the primary ones. And there's no question that among the customers that we surveyed, the telco shops that we surveyed, they really are struggling with the adaptability of their existing platforms and tooling for cloud native environments. And that's a significant hurdle on what they want to get from cloud native because, Eve, as you know, these organizations move to cloud native because they want agility, they want flexibility, they want to increase the speed of their business, they want to be able to improve how quickly they deliver new services to their customers. And if you're dealing with these issues, it basically impedes how quickly you can move.
Yeah, correct. And, as you know, from our side, as I mentioned earlier, we developed the Amdocs Microservice Foundation initially for our own use to accelerate the pace of our own developers to cloud native. But in the past 2 years or so, we see increased demand from our customers to provide this tool to them. From your point of view, how do you think the Amdocs Microservice Foundation could address those needs in general and those needs for the ones that need it in scale in more particular?
Yeah, I definitely think, what we found was that regardless of the size of the organization or how far along they were in their cloud native journey, they all basically saw a need and definitely saw value in moving to a platform that was simpler to use, for one thing, that had a full set of features and functionality that was all accessible, right?
Yeah.
That was very transparent in terms of its pricing model, and that allowed them to scale through this life cycle of cloud native application development. So I think there's value for every one of those segments of customers that we interviewed, regardless of whether they're starting, they're part way, or they're more sophisticated and at a more advanced stage. But there's, irrespective then, how far along they are in that journey, they have to overcome the challenges that we talked about earlier, and the current tooling isn't doing it. So I think you're in a very good position with the platform to go out there and, first of all, offer it to customers, show them what it can do.
Yeah.
And I think you will find a receptive audience. Service providers are really struggling with this, but it's something they need to do, right? It isn't as if they can say, well, I'm not going to do cloud native. They're going on this journey. They have very good reasons to pursue cloud native, but they need the right tooling to be able to execute the strategy. And I think you're in a good position here. Are you finding a favorable reception so far?
Yeah, actually, yes. And we found the same reasonings that you just outlined as the key reasonings for them to get interest and to buy and to deploy the Amdocs Microservices Foundation. One of the interesting points that we found out, one of the key feedback, was the extra consistency that the tool allows them, mainly at scale, because when you go at scale and each team is going different ways, I remember groups that were worshipping polyglot, for example, and then you get a cacophony. Each one is doing whatever, and then people cannot move from team to team because they used to different tools. And the Amdocs Microservice Foundation, actually, among other things, almost as a byproduct, create consistency through the entire organization, which actually helps to accelerate the development at scale.
Yes. And that's one of the things that also came through in the survey, is that customers, the respondents, put a tremendous amount of value on two things, right? Having a basic directional set, foundational set of guidance, right, for developers as they moved into cloud native. And also, the point that you're touching on right now, which is standardized and consistent platforms and tooling. It was unanimous right across every segment of respondent. That's something that organizations really want to have in-house.
Cool. By the way, I know that the research was global. Were there any meaningful differences between the different territories?
Yes, in certain cases there were. We found that, for instance, in EMEA, traditional developers were more of a point of resistance to, more than the other regions, more of a point of resistance to adoption of cloud native. We also found they were relatively high where they were struggling with their IT operations. So maybe there, at least among the respondents that we surveyed, there were a greater number of traditionalists in EMEA in this survey. We also found that in APAC, when it came to retaining cloud native developers, they seem to struggle more with that, and particularly around having the right roadmap for developers and being able to provide a nurturing culture for them. So that was a difference in APAC as well. So it was interesting. There were some variations on some of the questions, but generally, on those big issues we discussed, it was unanimous, both with respect to size of company, where they were in their cloud native adoption, and also, even the geographic breakdown. Some things were universal. We'll put it that way.
Cool. So, last but not least, where do you see the market, this specific market, the entire needs and tools and solutions and platform to accelerating cloud native development? Where is it heading, like in a year, 2, 3, 5? What's your view on that?
Yes, we definitely see. There's no question, and you can see it in the service provider strategies as you look forward, whether it's 5G, whether it's MEC, right through their telco cloud operations. They are moving to cloud native in a big way, and cloud native more generally is sweeping across the market. I know in our workload research, we know that in the next few years, this is for the entire market, we will have more new apps created than were created in the past 30 years. Wow. So there's going to be a deluge of these cloud native applications, and organizations have to know how to take them through the life cycle and how to scale them, and certainly how to support them. So we definitely see this happening in a big way, and there's no better time to come out with tooling that answers the needs and overcomes the challenges that these customers are experiencing.
So, Brad, as a VP Research, Data Centers, and Cloud Native Networks in IDC, I think I became more educated in this session. I hope also our audience. Stay tuned for the next chapters on the Rainmakers, and thank you very much, Brad, for participating and being my honorable guest.
Thank you, Zeev. It's been my pleasure. Thanks very much.